Hello everyone. I'm going to attempt to provide some clarity for task 4 of your key assessment, creating your task matrix. I've chosen to do this in Screencast-O-Matic so that I can talk to you about each box on the task matrix and perhaps give you verbally a couple of examples of the type of information that you would put in each box. First, to provide some overview, the task matrix is developed after the text set because it's the pieces you've inserted in your text set that you'll now add to a matrix. Okay? So, your text set items now get inserted into a task matrix. Next, let's talk about the term task. Task refers to the activities that your students in a birth to 12 setting complete and that go along with the reading and writing, viewing, representing activities that you selected, the 10 pieces on your text set. Okay? I hope that's provided a little bit of clarity about who's completing the tasks, your students in a school setting, and what pieces you use to develop the task matrix from the items you already selected for inclusion in your text set. Alright, now if I haven't confused anyone, we'll move along just a little bit. So the task matrix is divided into rows and columns. Across the top, you'll see spots where you can include tasks, those items that students complete, and reading is a task. Okay, so in the first column, these are relatively low level on Bloom's taxonomy. They require students to do something, most likely before they read, during the reading to support the reading and understanding the comprehension of the piece, and we'll have a brief response after the reading. It could be verbal, it could happen in the course of 5 minutes in a classroom. This is not an extensive item, and that's why it's in the first column. Very low level on Bloom's taxonomy goes here. The next column is where we edge up on Bloom's taxonomy a little bit higher. It requires thinking and application. It may require additional resources or readings. It could be where you involve more than one piece on your text set. Perhaps you'll put 3 pieces in this column, and it will have several before, during, and after tasks that students engage in to really push for learning related to those pieces. Going further along the matrix, I think you're probably beginning to see a pattern. We should be edging up Bloom's taxonomy just a little bit more in depth. This is where students are doing application projects, evaluating, creating something based on the new knowledge that they've gained through the prior text pieces that they've already engaged in. This could start with a new piece of reading, or it could simply be building from readings already completed earlier that you captured in the first or the second column, most likely the second column here. Now the fourth column is our highest level on Bloom's taxonomy. This is always going to be a writing task. It's going to be a culmination of the previous readings, or it may build solely on a reading from this column if that's applicable. You can choose to do only one option in this column if you want to develop a writing prompt for the students. And it can be based on any of the text pieces or any form or genre that you've included in your text set here, okay? So next, let's look at the rows. And I really would prefer you to just ignore the point value. That's really not intended to be so much as a point value reference as it is to just talk about how we would tier up with our students in our class if we were assigning points to these tasks on an arbitrary scale of 100 here. If we had 100 points on tasks related to this unit, where would they fall in evaluation means? And I don't even think that that's always accurate, so it would be my preference if we didn't think about points on the task matrix so much. All right, next let's go to the rows. For the first row, this is where you're going to list the text by title, provide a citation, a web link, and do a brief annotation about the instructional purpose of the text. A brief summary can provide the rationale for that, okay? So I'm going to provide you with a second document along with this screencast-o-matic that shows you an example of how I began to annotate here a little bit to include activities and descriptions across a task matrix for a science unit in middle grades. Of course, if your task matrix and text set is less complex, then the language is probably going to be a little bit simpler. If it's for secondary students, then it can gear up and be a little bit more complex. I think the key here is we're not so much caught up in where you're sticking each reading piece as the activities, the strategies of the task that you use to follow up in the before, during, and after reading sequence for the students, okay? But this first row is where you would describe the text itself and give us a brief description of purpose and rationale. In the next row, this is where you're going to link your literacy and content standards. So if I were doing a science lesson, I would go to the new science standards here, and I would link to the ILA literacy standards. Don't try to tackle everything in this row. Please just list the specific disciplinary standards and ILA standard that impact that text piece and tasks. The third row then is the before reading activities. Will you prompt students before they engage in the reading with a question, a prompt, a hook? What will you do there? Just describe that in this box. I would think that with any reading piece, there's going to be something that happens in your classroom before you ask students to read, and that's more in depth than just giving them the instructions to read the article or describing what they'll do after they read or how they'll read. This is more about engagement and providing a thinking question or a hook prior to the reading itself taking place. All right, as we move forward then, you're also going to have, during reading, guided activities or strategies or processes that help students do this. The easiest one that comes to mind off the top of my head is where will you have students engage in a read, pair, compare, or a pair share activity, or will they do group reading? Will they read independently? Will you have a reading guide where they fill in the blank? What strategies have you learned within your discipline that help students process information as they're reading? That's what goes in the during activity. Then next we come to the after reading options. Now we need to have more than one option whenever possible, and this comes into play more and more as we stagger across the chart. You would have more options perhaps here and here in these center two spaces than you would perhaps here, where it's very low level, meant to be quick. You might just have one activity in this column. Okay, then at the end you might only have a couple over here. If it's a writing activity, perhaps you're giving students one of two choices here for a writing activity, but you don't have to fill up all of these after boxes. It's really in this engagement here in the middle that you need to have the most options for students after reading. Remember, these are tasks that they complete after finishing the reading, and they're strategy based within your discipline. Okay? All right. If you're a science teacher, this is where the experiment would go after reading about some concept. If you're a math teacher, this would be where working the problems or doing some homework or working through an algorithm or modeling something might come into play. If you're a history teacher, this might be where you engage in an interpretation of a primary text, or whether you have a debate. Any of the activities that you might do in class. Okay, if you're an English teacher, this would be writing. If you're a PE teacher, is there a physical activity that goes here? Okay, so it's the application phase of the reading. Okay, so this is the basic of how the box and the matrix works. You won't necessarily fill in every single box because it's based on the text selection and where it fits in the box. Okay, so for this first row, you have to choose text pieces that go here, at least one or more text pieces that go here, here, and here. Your text set required you to select a minimum of 10 pieces. You have to decide where those 10 pieces best fit within these 4 column choices. So with that mathematical equation, 10 pieces fitting into 4 columns, you're going to have places where you have more than one text piece in each of these columns. Okay? The literary standards are going to vary based on what text pieces you've put up here. The before, during, and after reading options will vary based on what text pieces you've stacked here. My easy go-to is if you put more than one text piece in a column, that you label it A, B, C, or D. And then down here, when you do the during, before, during, or after activities, that you label the corresponding activity A, B, or C to go with what the piece actually is above. Sometimes they'll cross over, or reading 2 or 3 pieces might all apply to the same after activity. If so, just put A-C and then list the activity. Okay, but we want to be very clear about